We are in section 5.3, and this says identify the chambers, valves, and major blood vessels of the heart. And this freaks some students out that I'm going to ask you to know all this, but you're going to practice. You're going to practice in lecture a little bit. You're going to practice in lab. And if you were to be taking a live course, I would have you recite the circulation of the blood through the heart to me out loud. So you can do it. I get almost everybody. It's really more of a mental block that some people are like, I can't remember that much, but I think you'll be surprised. Learning the parts of the heart is actually kind of an interesting effort to, memorize something like that. But it's also interesting to know because almost all of us eventually have somebody, whether it's us or somebody in our life that has a heart problem. And it's really interesting to know where their problem is. And if you understand how the blood flows, you can understand why they're having the symptoms they're having. So it's one of those things that you do hear people talking about when they start having heart troubles. So what we're going to do is I want you to know the parts, and eventually we're going to look at the flow of the blood through the heart. So the first thing is, this is a frontal section of the heart. We cut the front from the back. So we're looking inside the heart. And there's first of all, I say, notice the locations of the right and left sides of the heart. I think we talked about this when we talked about anatomical position, that when you're looking at a body or you're looking at an organ, it is the organ or the body's left or right. Like as I'm staring at this is on my right side. But this heart's, the individual that has this heart, this is their left side. Okay, so remember when you're looking at a picture, the left and the right seem reversed because you're looking at the individual who owns this heart, their left or their right. So here's the left side, here's the right side. There's 4 chambers. A chamber is a space. The 2 chambers at the top of the heart, each is called an atrium. An atrium in a building is the entryway. And so I'm going to try to convince you that the blood is flowing into the heart from the top to the bottom, from the top to the bottom. And so both of the 2 atria or 1 atrium is where the blood enters. So it's not surprising that an atrium, these chambers are called an atrium, an entryway. So there's 4 chambers. There's the right atrium and there's the left atrium. The 2 chambers at the bottom are called ventricles. So there's a right ventricle and there's a left ventricle. And you can see there's this is the divider, these things that are called valves. So 4 chambers, right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. I put a picture in your study guide if you want to label it there. There's also a picture in your lab handout, so you can label if you want. There's 4 valves, and the 4 valves prevent the blood from flowing backwards. And one of the things, we know when somebody has a bad valve because they're not getting, they might get dizzy. They might not be getting enough oxygen. They might not be as strong or be able to, breathe very well because they're not getting, if the blood's flowing backwards, the blood's not getting oxygenated properly. So the 4 valves prevent the blood from flowing backwards. Now, in your book, they called these 2 valves atrial ventricular valves, AV valves, because they're between the atrium and the ventricle. They call these AV valves, which is a general name. You can call it the right AV valve. It's also got the name called the tricuspid valve. So I'll use both of those names. The right AV valve, also called the tricuspid valve. Cusps mean flaps, so this one has 3 flaps. The other valve between the atrium and the ventricles is the left AV valve, the left atrial ventricular valve. That one has the name of the mitral valve. And you might have heard of that because mitral valve problems are really common, even in healthy people, even in young people. It's like a genetic thing that some families have. So we've got 4 valves. we've got the tricuspid valve, also called the right AV valve. We've got the mitral valve, also called the left AV valve. Here we have a pulmonary valve. Now, have you, a lot of us have heard of CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Cardio means heart, pulmonary means lungs. So there's a valve that's going to carry the blood to the lungs before we get to that pulmonary artery. And then the fourth valve is going to carry the blood to the aorta. So we call that the aortic valve. So we have 4 valves that prevent the backflow of the blood. The right AV valve, also called the tricuspid valve, the left AV valve, also called the mitral valve, the pulmonary valve, and the aortic valve. We have 4 arteries / veins. First one we already mentioned, the vena cava. And so remember that veins carry blood towards the heart. So you can see the vena cava is carrying blood towards the heart. It's colored purple because it's, or blue, whatever it is, because it's carrying deoxygenated blood. So, and it's coming from below, inferior vena cava, and from above, superior vena cava. So the vena cava carries the blood, and you can see it's going to dump it into this right atrium. The aorta is going to carry blood away from the heart, and that's the big artery in the body. The pulmonary artery is going to carry blood to the lungs, and the pulmonary veins is going to carry blood from the lungs to the heart. You can see they enter there. There's 4 of those. 2 pulmonary arteries, 4 pulmonary veins. This is where the trick is. Remember we said arteries always carry blood away from the heart. So we've got 2 arteries. We've got the aorta carrying blood away from the heart. We've got the pulmonary artery carrying blood away from the heart, but notice that that pulmonary artery is bluish, purple, it's not red. The pulmonary artery is carrying deoxygenated blood because it's got to go to the lungs to pick up oxygen. And like I said, we'll talk about the flow of the blood, so that'll start seeming reasonable. The oxygen, the pulmonary veins carry blood from the lungs back to the heart, so the pulmonary veins carry oxygenated blood. So when we talked about arteries and veins, I said, let's go back and look at that. Arteries always carry blood away from the heart and almost always carry oxygenated blood, except for the pulmonary arteries, which carry deoxygenated blood. Veins always carry blood towards the heart and almost always carry deoxygenated blood, except for the pulmonary veins that carry blood from the heart to the lungs. So that's our exception. There's another exception in fetal circulation for a fetus, but we're not going to, I'm not going to hold you responsible for that right now. That's the one. I just want you to know pulmonary arteries and veins. Okay. So practice that on your diagrams. And like I said, you're going to practice this in lab too. The other structures I want you to notice is the heart kind of looks a little bit different on the outside, right? It's kind of like these flaps right here, they cover the atria. Most of the heart you see here are ventricles. But what I wanted you to notice here is right here. These blood vessels here that are on the surface of the heart. So not only does the heart have to deliver blood, oxygenated blood to the whole body, but the heart itself needs oxygenated blood. So branching off of the aorta, which is some of this here, are what we call the coronary arteries. And the coronary arteries and the coronary veins are the blood vessels that supply the heart itself with blood. The coronary arteries, because the heart's living tissue too. It needs blood vessels. It needs a blood supply. The coronary arteries are on the surface of the coronary arteries and veins are on the surface of the heart. They provide the heart itself with blood, the heart tissue. Okay, so the cardiac cycle. What we mean by the cardiac cycle is what happens during one heartbeat, which is less than a second. And there's electrical events, there's physical events. I just don't have time in this course to talk about the electrical events, but some of you know about people that have problems with the cardiac cycle, getting their heart to beat normally because they have pacemakers. And pacemakers can give the heart a little electrical jolt when the electricity in the heart's not working consistently on its own. We don't really have time to talk about that, but just to know that the cardiac cycle describes both the electrical and the physical events that happen in one heartbeat. So in that less than 1 second, the cardiac cycle, here we have that heart is relaxed. Now the body takes advantage of gravity. The blood's going to come in from the top of the heart, you can see the arrows here, and go to the bottom. It's going to come into the atria and go down to the ventricles. So what's going to happen is the heart's going to relax, blood's going to enter the heart. Then there's an electrical signal that squeezes the two atria, causes the two atria to contract. And that's going to push the blood down into the ventricles. So the top of the heart contracts. Then here they're showing you the bottom of the heart, the two ventricles contract and push the blood through the pulmonary arteries and the aorta. And then the whole heart relaxes. So we've got the top of the heart contracts, the bottom of the heart contracts, and then the whole heart relaxes. And that's what's happening in the cardiac cycle. You've got to have this rhythmic pattern. If you don't beat that way, if the bottom, if the right side contracts and then the left side, or, the bottom contracts before the top, something like that, the blood's not going to go in one direction through the heart. So it's very important this rhythm of the heart, this cardiac cycle, is working properly. So the heart fills with blood, the top contracts, pushes the blood to the bottom contracts, pushes the blood out of the heart, and then the whole heart relaxes and blood comes back in. Chunk, 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 relax, chunk, chunk, relax, chunk, chunk, relax. There's some words here that I think you've heard of because you've heard of blood pressure. The words are diastole and systole. Diastole is when a chamber is relaxed. So here you can see the ventricles are in diastole. The whole heart's relaxed. Or here, the top two chambers are contracted, the bottom's relaxed. Systole is when a chamber is contracting. So the atria are in systole, the ventricles are in diastole in this situation. One of the ways I remember this is D, I remember is dead. I think of the word dead meaning completely relaxed. So it's not really dead, but it means, if you were dead, your body would be completely relaxed. So that's when the chamber's relaxed. D for dead. Systole when a chamber's contracting. And that becomes important in blood pressure. The other thing I want to mention about the cardiac cycle is we've all had somebody listen to our heart. And they're listening for these sounds that are described as lub and dub. The lub and the dub signs are caused by the closing of the AV valves. So right here, when the bottom of the heart contracts, pushes blood out the pulmonary arteries and out the aorta, you've got to close these AV valves, or else the blood would flow backwards, right? So that lub sound is the closing of those valves. And the closing of the aortic and the pulmonary valves is the dub. So these valves, the aortic and the pulmonary, have to be closed when you're pushing blood into the bottom, or else the pressure would, let's see. Let me just back up. Refilling the heart. I think I have to be closed when you're refilling the heart. So So this, yeah, when you're refilling the heart, so this blood doesn't go backwards. So the lub and the dub are the closing of the AV valves and the closing of the aortic and pulmonary valves. They listen for that. If the trained professional hears kind of a swishing, a different kind of swishing sound, like kind of sound, along with their lub and dub, it might mean that some blood is squeezing through these valves backwards. And there's a trained person can actually figure out what valve is having a problem. So the lub and the dub sounds are the closing of the valves. You don't need to know which valve for which lub or dub, just to know that they're listening for the function of the valves. The valves need to close tightly so blood doesn't flow backwards. The sounds can be used to assess if the valves are working properly. Okay, I skipped ahead and put a 5.5 here. The way the book did it, I was having a hard time organizing myself, so I kind of moved a 5.5 learning outcome into this section. But it says compare the blood flow in the pulmonary and systemic circuits. And so when you look at, here's the heart. And what you can see is the blue side, the right side of the heart, is pumping blood to the lungs. We call that the pulmonary circuit. The left side of the heart is pumping blood to the rest of the body. And that's the systemic. It's pumping blood to the system. And they're showing here how the aorta branches into other arteries, arterioles, capillaries. Then it merges into venules and veins and the vena cava and back to the heart. So that's a systemic circuit. The right side's going to pump the blood to the lungs and back. The left side's going to pump the blood to the entire body. And I put a note here to remind myself to tell you the left ventricle pumps the blood the farthest. So if you remember your chambers, this one right here is the left ventricle. The right ventricle, let's see, the right atrium only has to pump blood to the right ventricle. The right ventricle pumps blood to the lungs. That comes into the left atrium, which only needs to pump blood to the left ventricle. But the left ventricle has to pump blood to the entire body. And so notice here that the way this picture is drawn, there's a lot more muscle around the left ventricle than any of the other chambers, because this chamber of the heart has to pump the blood the farthest. So here we have the flow of the blood through the heart, and I think I'll put this on a separate video. I'll stop right here.